think it's best finish what we left off. The Neuroscientific Anomalies Iceberg needs to be finished. There are lots of mysteries yet to be uncovered. Lots of things that we do not yet understand. But in this video, we will finally get to understand what they mean. But before I get into this video, I would like to thank you all for the amount of support that I've been receiving recently, especially from people who like and comment my videos. Hopefully after this video drops, we can hopefully try and reach 100 subscribers. It would be really appreciated. Even if we can't, I am still very glad for the audience that I have garnered so far. But without further ado, let's move on to stage 4. Alien hand syndrome is a condition in which a person feels like their own limbs are not attached to their body, almost as if their own limbs have their mind of their own. That makes sense. They don't feel like they have control of their own limbs, essentially. What a weird condition. Biophotons in brain refers to the fact that maybe, just maybe, photons are being used to send information from neuron to neuron in the brain. Now, photons, if you don't know what that is, essentially light is made up of photons. They're these really tiny particles that can travel basically instantly, and they compose up light. And the theory is that our brain uses photons to relay information to other parts of the brain. Skull and brain are parasites. This refers to the encephalization quotient, which is a graph that essentially compares how small or big species brain is compared to other species who have a similar body proportion. And it turns out that humans are way above the average. Our brain is massive compared to the size of our body, and that's kind of weird, to be honest. And what I assume this theory is trying to get is that our brains are our own kind of creature, maybe some alien parasite from some other world came onto Earth and merged with our brains or something. I don't know, but it relates back to the book Spinal Catastrophism, which I'll link below in the description. Spinal Catastrophism is a book that was written by Thomas Moynihan. Moynihan talks about the connection between our back and our brain. He talks about how psychic ailments have afflicted our back and have caused issues for it. And he goes a lot into detail in his book, so I would recommend you check it out. Gut microbiome refers to the 5 ways that the gut microbiome can impact the human body. Number 1. Structural bacterial components such as I have no idea how you say that, provide low-grade tonic stimulation of the innate immune system. Number 2. Bacterial proteins may cross-react with human antigens to stimulate dysfunctional responses of the adaptive immune system. Number 3. Bacterial enzymes may produce neurotoxic metabolites such as D-lactic acid and ammonia. Number 4. Gut microbes can produce hormones and neurotransmitters that are identical to those produced by humans. And finally, the last one in the article, number 5, gut bacteria directly stimulates afferent neurons of the enteric nervous system to send signals to the brain via the vagus nerve. And that is what the gut microbiome is all about. Exploding head syndrome is a condition in which whenever a person is about to fall asleep, or even when they wake up, they feel these loud noises in their head, almost as if their head is going to explode, as the name implies. Loud noises can include stuff like gunshots, stuff like bombs, anything loud and ecstatic, thunderstorms as well. Even visual hallucinations like flashes of light can happen during these episodes of exploding head syndrome. Thankfully, it's not as bad as it sounds, although it's still pretty messed up. Ideesthesia is a hard one to explain. It's similar to synesthesia, but instead of a sense merging with a sense, it's an idea merging with a sense. It's hard to explain, but the best explanation that I can give is this one right here. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Which shape do you think sounds like the word Kiki? Is it this one or this one? Majority of people would probably say it's this one. And which shape sounds like the word boba? Is it this one or this one? Again, majority of people would say that it's this one. But why? But why does that happen? But why does a shape sound like a word? This is exactly what the premise of ideesthesia is. Because the word Kiki sounds sharper, we normally associate Kiki with this shape right here. And since the word boba sounds like rounder, we associate boba with this shape right here. That's what ideesthesia is all about. It's the merging of ideas with the senses. An out-of-body experience is very interesting. It's essentially an experience in which you feel your own reality from a third-person point of view. It's really weird and trippy. I've actually had one, I think earlier this year. I woke up one of these days and then I realized that I was just a human being like everybody else, and then I started having an out-of-body experience. And I started looking at the world from outside my body, which is pretty weird. Out-of-body experiences are very interesting, and they can happen to anybody, even outside of drug trips. The Hodgson-Huxley model is a model to represent how action potentials in neurons operate. An action potential occurs when the membrane potential of a cell rapidly rises and falls. A membrane potential is the difference in an electrical potential of the inside and outside of a cell. And finally, an electric potential is the amount of energy needed to move a charge from point A to point B. So this model is essentially a model, an electrical model in fact, of neurons and their electrical charges. It's an electrical circuit for neurons essentially. The third eye, normally located smack dab in the middle of your forehead, is a chakra that represents truth and knowledge. Essentially, opening your third eye is ascending to a higher astral plane of knowledge and reality. The third eye has to do a lot with like the supernatural and existentialism and the truth of reality. Anatoly Burgorsky was a Russian physicist who accidentally stuck his head inside of a particle accelerator. Now, thankfully, Burgorsky didn't die because of this. But the left half of Burgorsky's face did swell up. And on top of that, his skin started to peel off as the radiation beam melted through his skull, his brain, everything. And he did receive a lethal dose of radiation. His left side of his face became completely paralyzed, almost frozen in time. I'll show you a pic of what he looks like now. Low levels of serotonin are responsible for depression. So scientists took cells from people with major depression, right? Then they transformed those cells into stem cells. They then coaxed the cells to the point where they turn into serotonergic neurons, which are responsible for creating serotonin in the brain. They then compared the serotonergic neurons of patients who had taken serotonin supplements versus patients who hadn't taken serotonin supplements, and they found that the serotonin supplements had done little to no effect in helping them with their depression. Gut connected to brain refers to a discovery that scientists found that the gut is directly connected to the brain through a neurocircuit, meaning that the gut can send signals to the brain in the matter of mere seconds. An infovore is somebody who is literally obsessed with information and will literally plug 173 information spewing computers directly into their brains just so they can be smarter than others. Epilepsies and religious experiences refers to the fact that people who are epileptic are more likely to be religious, which I don't know what the article is trying to get at, but I guess epilepsy's helping religious faith or something. On the Paleocastro site on Thasos Island in Greece, archaeologists found 10 skeletal structures of dead people from ancient Greece, some of which had very weird cuts and incisions in their skulls, which leads to the theory that even as far back as ancient Greece, people were trying to do brain surgery on other people. St. Paul epilepsy. In Old Ireland, epilepsy was sometimes known as St. Paul's disease. The name references an assumption that Paul the Apostle suffered from epilepsy. A lot of verses seem to support this claim, but probably the biggest piece of evidence comes from Acts 9:3-9. Suddenly a light from the sky flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Saul got up from the ground and opened his eyes, but he could not see a thing. For 3 days he was not able to see, and during that time he did not eat or drink anything. In our brain are two parts, the left part of our brain and the right part of our brain, which govern logic and creativity respectively. But Felix Hausler proposed a third part that deals with repetition, accuracy, and speed. He then later goes on to talk about how AI can help deal with stuff like repetition and how it can help free other parts of our mind and help with humanity as a whole. The Frey effect is pretty interesting. It consists of the human perception of hearing clicks, buzzes, any other weird wacky noise by essentially blasting radio frequencies towards us. People that suffer from mental conditions in which they might hear stuff that is or isn't there have tied this into stuff like MKUltra, stating that the government uses these radio waves to cause delusions in the people and the masses. So if I go missing after this video, that means that this theory is correct. Gut microbiome treatment refers to, well, what we talked before about the gut microbiome and how the gut microbiome affects stuff like neurotransmission, neuroendocrine, metabolic, and neuroimmune pathways. But what's even crazier is that the microbiome itself might even be related to epilepsies, and treating a gut's microbiome, aka the bacteria that is inside there, can possibly help with epilepsy attacks. Alexander Luria is sometimes known as the modern father of neuropsychology. He did a lot of testing on World War II soldiers, which have helped influence modern neuropsychology to this day. He made a very in-depth analysis of the functioning human brain, mapping out different regions as he went along. He also proposed a central theory that states as following: the human development is a complex process that must be framed within social, cultural, and historical contexts. Galen/Galen was a Roman/Greek physician surgeon, and philosopher. He is considered to be one of the most accomplished in terms of medical practices in ancient times. Galen influenced many scientific areas, including anatomy, physiology, psychology, neurology, philosophy, and in general, logic. Mental time travel is when a person has the ability to mentally reconstruct events from the past or even predict future ones. So very weird and interesting condition. Konstantin von Economo was an Austrian psychiatrist and neurologist. He helped discover encephalitis lethargica, which is a disease that attacks the brain and paralyzes people. Whole brain imaging of neural activity is a cool video, which I'll leave a link down below, that goes into how neurologists can study and scan animals' brains. And just like that, stage 4 of the iceberg is complete. On to stage 5. Nervous system in plants refers to the fact that while plants don't really have a brain of some sorts, kind of, they do have a sort of nervous system to an extent. For example, some plants have a natural defense mechanism when they get wounded. Like, for example, they'll release some sort of toxin that harms whatever's trying to hurt it. Phantom limb is very similar to the alien hand syndrome, but it's a bit different. It's the opposite, in fact. It's when an amputee, so somebody who loses their arm for whatever reason, or goes through surgery, feels like their arm is still there even though it's not, or their leg, or any other limb, essentially. I'll show you a video right now of a cat trying to use its left hand, even though it's not there. Essentially, the cat still thinks that its left limb is still attached, so it tries to do the movement, but it doesn't work. It has been hypothesized that the heart is the second brain. Why? Because it has a sort of nervous system of sorts, to an extent. It has around 40,000 neurons, which are responsible for tuning the heart. Not only do they tune the heart, but they can even help fight against heart diseases on top of that. A cerebral organoid is a tiny organ that is grown inside one of those like small glass things that scientists use. Picture up here. That is meant to represent a smaller version of the brain. Yeah, it's artificially grown too, by the way. Cerebral organoids are created using stem cells, and they are created to essentially help understand the brain more and how diseases impact the brain. I'll show you a photo of what it looks like. Neurohacking is the process of improving one's brain through brain hacking. So, brain hacking can include stuff like self-improvement, stuff like getting more sleep, even stuff like using supplements, and any other means necessary to help increase your brain's processing capability. It's kind of hard to explain, but yeah, it's essentially people self-improving their own brain using methods, I'm pretty sure. Well, would you look at that? Neuromarketing. It's one of those ones that is exactly what it sounds like. It's using neurology to help predict certain economic behaviors in people, and to help essentially find out what attracts people from an economic perspective and what will really catch people's eyes and what will get people buying your products. This one is about a guy teaming up with a YouTuber who supposedly found an alien. It wasn't an alien. It turned out that it was a weird human skeleton with a lot of mutations. And then the two of them published a paper and became famous. And yeah, new stuff was discovered. The God helmet refers to this helmet created by neuroscientist Michael Persinger that wanted to create a helmet to help study the brain, but also to give people a weird kind of experience in which they feel like they are in the presence of a higher power. And yeah, apparently this is a hoax, and this helmet doesn't do anything. So yeah, here's a photo of what it looks like. DID, also known as dissociative identity disorder, is a disorder in which somebody has multiple personalities. There's this one case of somebody who was blind for 15 years who regained sight during some psychotherapeutic treatment. What was weird about this case was that the person who regained sight only regained sight for certain personalities that person had due to DID, or DID. This is extremely shocking news, that a person was able to regain sight because of being treated for a different condition, which is very bizarre and weird. Scientists still have not figured this one out yet. Memories after organ transplants is one of the most interesting ones on this entire iceberg. So this goes into a case study that happened. An 8-year-old girl received a 10-year-old girl's heart. After she received her heart through transplant, she started having these weird nightmares of a guy trying to kill her. It was later found out that the 10-year-old girl was actually killed by a murderer, who was later identified through the 8-year-old girl's nightmares. What had happened is that memories stored in the 10-year-old girl's heart was transferred over to the 8-year-old girl. This was something shocking when it happened. That means that memories aren't just stored in the brain, but can be stored in other body parts as well, which is something mind-blowing. Neuroplasticity is the ability of neural networks in the brain to change and evolve to fit other certain circumstances. It's essentially the brain autocorrecting itself to function in a different way. This happens a lot when you're growing up, hitting puberty. Your brain goes through many changes, but this can even happen during adulthood. Quantum mind is a theory that states that with regular technology, we will never be able to understand consciousness and other weird aspects of our brain, and that only through quantum mechanics, like superposition or entanglement, will we be able to fully understand the brain. My video on thought experiments goes into quantum mechanics, so check that out. Hypercomputing minds refers to the debate on whether our brains are hypercomputers or not. Hypercomputers are these theoretical supercomputers that are insane. The statement for the fact that our minds are hypercomputers says that our minds are even more advanced than what a regular hypercomputer would be considered. But there's also a statement against, saying that the way that we perceive stuff like math and science and stuff isn't as advanced as a mind that claims to be a hypercomputer should be. Anti-memory. A theory suggests that when our brains create memories, at the same time, our brain creates something called an anti-memory, which has the opposite neural connections to the original memory. Scientists have debated on why our brain does that, if the theory is to be true. The leading explanation is that it's to create a balance of electrical activity in our brain. Very strange on how our brain operates. We will have to wait until more information comes out on this. Joan of Arc was a very important figure in the 100 Years' War, which happened in the 14th and 15th century. During the 100 Years' War, she saw a lot of visions and things that prophesize the future. Nowadays, with the advanced technology and science that we have, the leading theory is that these visions were in fact epilepsy attacks. Just how we mentioned previously before when we talked about St. Paul, here we have the exact same thing. Joan of Arc's visions announced her about Orleans. So, it was England versus France. England had penetrated deep into the heart of France, and they were about to take the city of Orleans, until Joan of Arc showed up, and Orleans was not taken. This was the turning point in the 100 Years' War for France. But before the siege of Orleans, Joan of Arc had received some visions about how she had to go defend that city, which leads people to believe that maybe she had some sort of spiritual connection or something. But neurologists like to believe that she just had epilepsy. So yeah, that's what that is all about. Jacob Boehme was the God-taught philosopher. I'm gonna read you his teachings. Chapter 1, Introduction. The only reality, external reasoning, is inadequate to comprehend internal truth. Historical aspect of the Bible, man created in the image of God, the universal and the perverted self-will of man, atonement, the yoga practice illuminated seers Jacob Boehme's spiritual knowledge in his terrestrial conditions, how his writings can be understood. Chapter 2, The Unity of All. I think you get the point. So you thought people doing brain surgery in ancient Greece was pretty bizarre. Wait until you hear about this one. Ira Rutkow. As quoted, there have been many instances of skulls that have been found during back to Neolithic times, aka like caveman times, that have grooves in them where portions of the skull have been removed, and it's evident if you look at these skulls that this was all done by hand. He goes ahead and talks a bit more. With many of these older skulls, new bone growth had already formed, and bone in the skull can only form if the patient is alive. So, were they doing brain surgery in ancient times, in caveman times? We don't know, but there have been some interesting findings nonetheless. There's no normal brain refers to this guy by the name of Howard Timberlake, who was diagnosed with ADHD at 38. He went on this quest to find out if there was such a thing as a normal brain, aka a typical mind. And what he found out is that using neurodiversity, there is no such thing as a normal brain. Our brains are all programmed differently from each other. Image reconstruction from human brain activity refers to the fact that with the technology that we now have nowadays, stuff like BNNs, we can now, using magnetic resonance imaging activity, decode our brain and display what we're thinking onto machines and onto screens. So, mind reading is a thing nowadays. Have fun sleeping at night, knowing that the whole world can know your secrets. Spatiotemporal decoding of animal position and orientation, and full duplex optical neurotransduction both relate to the same thing. I'll leave the YouTube video in the description down below because it's really interesting and it gets into a lot of like interesting topics and about how our technology is advancing and stuff like that. I think it's best for you guys to check it out. Stage 5 of the Iceberg is done. On to stage 6, the final one. Brain in a Vat is a thought experiment. Wait, that sounds familiar. Brain in a Vat is a thought experiment that proposes an idea like this. What if our reality is fake? What if we're nothing but brains in a vat? Our reality is not real. We are brains inside of a vat that are hooked up to a complex machine, that simulate real life to make us think like we're living in real life, but we're not. This is all a simulation. But we feel like we're in real life because our brain is in a vat that's connected to the simulation, if that makes sense. The theory of brain in a vat gets even crazier. What if the brain in the vat is also a brain in a vat of its own, and it believes that it's in real life, but it's actually not, because it's also being simulated by another brain in the vat, which is also being simulated by another. It's also being simulated by another one. And it's just an endless amount of brains in a vat. Until we get to the original brain in the vat. Now, could that original brain in the vat be God? Who knows? It's all a mystery. But nonetheless, brain in the vat is a cool concept. Check out this video, please. Mind uploading is very similar to brain in the vat, but it applies a concept of the now more than a theoretical thing of what could have and could have not happened in the past. Essentially, mind uploading is, again, what the title says. It's connecting our brains to complex machines that can create simulations in which we can do whatever we want in them. Right? Now, one of two things could take place here. One, our brain could be directly connected to the computer, and our consciousness would stay the same. Or two, it would create a copy inside the computer, and our brains would be transferred over. Ray Kurzweil says that by the year 2045, we'll be able to upload our brains into computers and possibly live forever. AKA, we'll reach immortality. That 2045 is a very special year because that's when the singularity is meant to happen. AKA, robots and machines become smarter than humans. And they become smarter at an exponential rate. Something which I'll cover in a future video. So by the year 2045, we'd be fully living in machines. We could create simulations in which an infinite amount of pleasure hormones are put into our brain forever. Or simulations in which people can do whatever they want, which is very weird and dystopian. And that will beg some questions on what should happen. Which is very, very interesting. But it's not just the things you have to be concerned about when it comes to people doing whatever they want. What if it's things that people don't want to do? For example, what if people in the future create torture simulations, or simulations where people are enslaved for energy and people's brains are hooked onto those simulations? Concepts like these are extremely dystopian and extremely nightmarish, and hopefully nothing like this ever happens, although judging by how technology is advancing, more than likely it will. And that begs the question on where we draw the line with technology. Because in the future, things can go downhill really, really fast. And people could use technology to really harm others. The Industrial Revolution and its consequences. Holonomic brain theory is essentially a theory that just states that consciousness is formed by quantum physics in between cells. Like, our understanding of physics cannot describe what consciousness is. Jacobo Grinberg was a Mexican scientist, neurophysiologist, and psychologist. He studied a lot of Eastern philosophies and stuff like meditation and astrology. He was a very interesting fellow. But what's weird about him is the fact that on December 8th of 1994, he went missing, seemingly no reason. There are a lot of conspiracy theories as to why he went missing. A lot of his theories are kind of reality breaking. In 1944, the year he went missing, he found out that if a couple meditated together in the same room, that their brain waves would kind of merge together. They would essentially synchronize together. He would essentially flash a flashlight into one of the subject's eyes, and then, strangely enough, the other subject would sometimes correlate with the flashes of light, about 25% of the time. This was measured using an EEG, which reads your brain's activity. So who knows? Maybe he knew something that we didn't, and that's why he's missing. Sword Art Online Got Real refers to the fact that the original creator of the Oculus Rift, Palmer Luckey, created an in real life VR headset in which if you die in the game, you literally die in real life. Like, that thing will literally explode and fucking kill you. And this brings up some questions about the dangers of technology. Although pro gamers should never have any issues with that headset. Brain jacking is a really bizarre dystopian one as well. It's referring to the fact that in the future, more than likely, transhumanism will happen, will merge with AI. And that in the future, our body could be prone to hacking, aka people hacking our body parts. Even our brain could be hacked. And since our brain creates our own reality, people could essentially do anything they want to us. And this could even be governments doing this. It could be a Redditor in his mom's basement as he turns 40 next year and he has absolutely nothing else to do, so he decides to do this. It could be anybody hacking into our brain. And again, the dangers of technology are brought up here. The blind brain hypothesis is a hypothesis by R. Scott Bakker in his book Neuropath. It basically talks about how our consciousness is just essentially an illusion and how it deceives us, and how our reality is created by us, but what is base reality isn't what we think it is, only what our brain wants us to think it is, essentially. And how our brain appears to self-reflection in our own interests, instead of what actual specific systems and stuff that happen in real life are. Memory evoked through stimulation is a sheet online of people living through their past memories because of their brains being electrically stimulated. I will leave a link in the description down below. Shut down. There's a thing called the claustrum. The claustrum is a thin sheet of neurons and cells that connects the cerebral cortex and connects stuff like the amygdala, hippocampus, and thalamus to the brain. There's a study found that when the area between the claustrum and insula was stimulated with electricity, that consciousness would just mysteriously shut off. What's weird is that patients that had a lesion in their left claustrum were more prone to lose their consciousness than patients that had a lesion outside of it. What's weird is that the patients who were electrically stimulated had no idea that they lost their consciousness. They didn't feel anything. It's almost as if they went through a coma, as if they skipped through time. This is really weird, and it's really bizarre how somebody could just lose their consciousness just like that. And this is a step in the right direction, a step to answer a question that we've always had. What is consciousness? And that's it. Those are all the 6 stages. We did it! We finally did it! We finally solved out the mysteries of neuroscience. And I couldn't have done it without y'all. But there are more mysteries to be solved. Especially during October, the month of Halloween. We're not done yet when it comes to mystery solving. Tune in next time to the next episode of Samlock Holmes, where we're going to be covering more mysteries that lie beneath us.